General Hospital spoilers reveal that there was a chill in the summer air that didn't match the season. In Port Charles, everything looked deceptively calm. Fireworks had barely faded from the night sky when the real explosion began, one that would fracture lives and expose the true cost of deception. The illusion of control, of strategic seduction, of professional detachment, had already crumbled. And at the center of the storm stood Vaughn, no longer just the enigmatic WSB agent, no longer just a pawn in a covert maneuver. But now a man whose single miscalculation had left Emma Scorpio Drake pregnant and the entire operation in jeopardy. What had started as a tactical distraction, a clean operation designed to divert Emma from the dangerous orbit of Professor Hank Dalton, had now spiraled into something monstrous. The plan had been simple, at least on paper. Keep Emma occupied, emotionally engaged with Vaughn, so that her investigative curiosity would die down. Vaughn, trained to manipulate, to charm, to deceive, was the perfect candidate. Or so the agency believed. But no amount of conditioning, no handbook, no surveillance algorithm could prepare him for the rawness of emotion he encountered in Emma's eyes. Or the innocent vulnerability she offered him when he least expected it. And now, the price of that night, the night that should never have happened, was a pregnancy test clutched in Emma's trembling hands. And a young woman staring down a future more uncertain than she'd ever imagined. The weight of Vaughn's mistake didn't stop at Emma. It stretched outward like a shockwave, reaching Josslyn Jax, the very person who had devised this reckless operation in the first place. For Joss, the lines between duty and emotion had already blurred dangerously. Her feelings for Vaughn, once buried beneath sarcasm and strategy, were real. And now, the same man she had helped embed into Emma's life had betrayed them both in the most intimate way possible. But Vaughn's betrayal was more than just personal. It exposed a far deeper rot within WSB, a black vein of corruption pulsing beneath its polished surface. 4 weeks now. Whispers had been growing louder within the agency. Rumors of an unsanctioned directive, one that involved behavioral manipulation, emotional weaponization, and even reproductive interference, a vile tactic reserved for situations where psychological control wasn't enough. Vaughn, whether knowingly or not, had just become the living proof that such a directive existed. And now, Emma was the collateral damage of a war she never enlisted in. Josslyn, ever resourceful, ever bold, began to suspect that her role in this entire affair was never about protecting Emma from Dalton. It was about testing loyalty, isolating vulnerabilities, and seeing just how far WSB trainees could be pushed before they broke. And she was breaking, emotionally, mentally, physically. Vaughn's betrayal cut deeper than she expected. Not because he chose Emma, but because he chose to follow through with the deception to a point where it could no longer be unwound. A pregnancy was no longer a subplot. It was the detonator for everything that followed. Meanwhile, Emma found herself drowning in a silence she couldn't escape. The joy of a possible life growing inside her was eclipsed by the circumstances of its conception. She hadn't just fallen in love, she had fallen into a net designed to catch her curiosity, suffocate her independence, and distract her from truths too dangerous to uncover. And now, those truths were bleeding out, one revelation at a time. She tried to tell herself Vaughn cared, that maybe the chemistry between them wasn't all pretend. But his silence, his disappearance from her world following their night together, said otherwise. She was alone. Or so she thought. Because Gio, always the loyal friend, always the silent protector, had been watching from the sidelines with growing horror. He saw the shift in Emma's demeanor, the hesitation in her words, the sadness in her smile. And though he hadn't known the details, he knew something had changed her, something serious. When Emma finally confessed everything to him, the betrayal burned like acid in his chest. Not just Vaughn's manipulation, but Josslyn's involvement. The people they trusted had played them like pieces on a board. And for Gio, that meant war. But as the personal stakes escalated, so too did the professional ones. WSB, realizing the operation had slipped from their grasp, began tightening their grip on those involved. Josslyn, once their golden trainee, was now being watched. Her communications were intercepted, her movements tracked, her loyalties questioned. She could feel the noose tightening. She had signed up to serve. To protect, to make a difference. But now she was a liability. And in the world of WSB, liabilities didn't get second chances, they got silenced. Desperate to shield Emma from further trauma, Joss made the unthinkable decision: she would blow the whistle. Expose the operation. Leak the evidence. Make it all public. But the clock was ticking, and WSB's reach was long. Every step she took toward the truth brought her closer to being eliminated. Vaughn, aware of the storm he had helped unleash, tried to extract himself, but it was too late. His name was on too many reports, his fingerprints on too many classified files. WSB wouldn't let him walk away clean. And if Emma's pregnancy ever went public, Vaughn wouldn't just be disavowed, he'd be destroyed. Emma, meanwhile, had begun to experience the symptoms of early pregnancy: nausea, dizziness, emotional fluctuations, all of which compounded her growing sense of isolation. Gio insisted on being there for her, insisted on helping raise the child if Vaughn refused to step up. But Emma, still uncertain whether the child was the result of genuine affection or cold manipulation, couldn't make peace with bringing life into a world so dark, so tangled in secrets. And as much as she cared for Gio, she knew involving him further would only put him in danger. What followed was chaos, slow, creeping chaos that infected every aspect of their lives. Gio found himself followed by unfamiliar cars, his phone buzzing with blocked numbers and silent calls. Joss had her apartment broken into, her files rifled through, her laptop wiped clean. Vaughn was called back to WSB headquarters and then vanished without a trace. Rumors swirled that he had been reassigned, imprisoned, or worse. And Emma? Emma was left holding the weight of it all, a child she didn't plan, a betrayal she couldn't comprehend, and a future she didn't recognize. The entire town buzzed with speculation. Port Charles, a place used to scandals and betrayals, had never seen a story like this. Behind every smile was suspicion, behind every friendly gesture a question of motive. Emma tried to stay grounded, for her child, for her sanity, but she knew the ground beneath her feet was unstable. WSB would not let this go quietly. They had spent too much, risked too much, and now had everything to lose if the truth came out. The question remained: was Vaughn a monster, or a man who lost control of his mission and found something human inside it? Was Josslyn a co-conspirator or a victim of a system she thought she understood? And Gio, poor Gio, was he the hero of this story, or just another casualty waiting to happen? No one knew anymore. The lines were too blurred, the damage too deep. But one thing was certain: the baby growing inside Emma was no longer just a consequence of recklessness. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. And perhaps, if she could survive long enough to bring it into the world, it might also become the symbol of everything she hoped could be made right. Because sometimes, even in the darkest plans, life finds a way. But that life, and the future of everyone involved, would now be shaped by lies, shadows, and the choices made when no one else was watching. The quiet that followed that fateful night between Vaughn and Emma was not peace, it was the silence before a storm that would devastate every life it touched. At first, there was confusion, unspoken guilt, and the fragile attempts to pretend that nothing had changed, but nothing could hide the truth that now pulsed between them like a live wire. Something had happened that neither of them could undo, and now, with each passing day, their connection only deepened, uncontrollably and dangerously. What began as a tactic to lure Emma away from a dangerous investigation had unraveled into a real, raw attachment that Vaughn never intended, and Emma, despite all logic, couldn't resist. She was supposed to be a mission, a name on a report, but now when Vaughn looked at her, all he could see was the warmth of someone who had seen through him, someone who, against all odds, began to love the version of himself even he didn't fully recognize. And Emma, wounded by deception yet drawn to the unexpected gentleness he showed her, clung to this fragile, tangled hope. It terrified her, but she was already in too deep. Meanwhile, in the corners of Port Charles where trust was starting to collapse, Josslyn was imploding. Her carefully curated control was slipping through her fingers like ash, and the rage that had once simmered beneath the surface was now beginning to boil. Vaughn, the man she trusted. The man she plotted with, the one she believed would follow her lead, had crossed the line in the most unforgivable way. It wasn't just betrayal, it was desecration. And the worst part wasn't that he had slept with Emma, it was that he had fallen for her. Josslyn saw it in the way he looked at her, in the way his voice softened when Emma's name came up. In the guilt that wrapped around his silence. That night at Metro Court had been the turning point. She had orchestrated a fake breakup in public, a moment designed to draw Emma in. Make her see Vaughn as someone vulnerable, someone worth saving. She thought it was just a step in the operation. She never thought Vaughn would take it beyond the surface, beyond the mission. Into something real. And now Emma was pregnant, and everything had changed. The weight of that truth fractured Josslyn's worldview. She had always believed she was the smartest person in the room. The one pulling the strings. But Vaughn had slipped free, and Emma had stolen the center of the story. Josslyn's heartbreak mutated into something darker. She couldn't cry, so she calculated. She couldn't forgive, so she plotted. With every heartbeat, her need to reclaim power grew into obsession. She began logging Vaughn's moves, tracing encrypted WSB communications. Assembling fragments of internal reports. If Vaughn was no longer an asset, he would become evidence. Josslyn knew how to frame a narrative, and if she couldn't control Vaughn emotionally, she would control how the world saw him. And she wasn't finished. She turned her eyes to Gio. Sweet, loyal, heartbroken Gio. He had been collateral damage in this whirlwind. But now he became something else entirely, an ally, a mirror, a tool. Josslyn didn't need to lie to Gio, she just needed to tell him the right truths. The ones that hurt. The ones that shattered. She told him about the night at the pool, about the look on Emma's face when she touched Vaughn's arm, about how long they were alone, how Vaughn left that night and never came back. And then, when she saw his hands clench and his eyes narrow, she whispered one last seed, maybe Vaughn never planned to come back. Maybe Emma was just a mission to him. Maybe she still is. Gio spiraled. Emotions long buried beneath stoic silence bursting to the surface. He had loved Emma in his own quiet way, watched over her, protected her, hoped that one day she might see him. And now, she had given herself to someone else, someone dangerous, someone false. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was humiliation. And in that humiliation, Gio found rage. Emma, unaware of the war brewing around her, tried to keep her life from collapsing. Every morning she stared at the mirror longer than necessary, wondering who she was becoming. The pregnancy changed her body, but the truth changed her spirit. She couldn't separate the child she was carrying from the lie it came from. She wanted to believe Vaughn felt something real. And when he returned, when he touched her hand and looked into her eyes without flinching, she almost believed it. But fear lingered. She didn't know if she was part of a love story or a cover-up. The world around her was watching, whispering, judging. Rumors spread quickly, and Josslyn had seen to that. A leaked audio clip, vague enough to be deniable but damning enough to go viral, painted Vaughn as a manipulator and Emma as a naive fool. It didn't take long for Emma's name to be dragged through local gossip columns, student forums, even professional circles. People she admired looked at her differently. She stopped attending class. She stopped responding to texts. And Vaughn, though present, offered no solutions. He wanted to fix it. But the damage was already done. And then came the first threat. A note slipped under Josslyn's door, unsigned, typed, "You're not invisible. We see everything." It was a warning from WSB, or from Vaughn, or from someone else entirely. But Josslyn didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. They had seen everything? Good. Let them watch. Because she wasn't going to stop. She would burn the whole operation to the ground if it meant taking Vaughn and Emma with it. She wanted them to know what it felt like to lose control. She wanted them to drown. Emma, overwhelmed, turned to Gio. She wanted to make amends, to explain, to beg for forgiveness. But Gio was not the boy she remembered. He had grown cold. Distant. His eyes didn't soften when he looked at her anymore. When she told him she was scared, he nodded, but said nothing. When she cried, he didn't reach for her. And then, finally, he said the words she feared most, "I don't know who you are anymore." Vaughn, sensing the implosion, tried to make things right. He scheduled a private meeting with an internal WSB contact. Intending to come clean, to offer himself up in exchange for protection for Emma. But it was too late. Josslyn had already moved the final piece. She had copied a classified report, the one that named Emma as a civilian asset, one that should never have been touched. If leaked, it would not only destroy Vaughn's career. It would endanger Emma's life. Vaughn received the encrypted file in his inbox with no signature, just one line in the subject, "Look what you did." He knew it was Josslyn. He knew this was war. But he didn't expect the final twist. That night, while Emma slept, exhausted and overwhelmed, Gio showed up at Josslyn's apartment. He didn't say a word. She let him in. And when he sat beside her, broken and bitter, she didn't offer comfort. She offered revenge. They could fix it all. They could destroy Vaughn. They could erase the entire mess. All it would take was one final push. Vaughn was already under surveillance. Emma was already vulnerable. All they had to do was tip the scales. And as Josslyn leaned in and whispered the plan, Gio didn't flinch. He listened. He nodded. And the moment he agreed, something inside him died. Vaughn and Emma had ignited something they couldn't contain. But now, Josslyn and Gio were going to finish what they started. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about retribution. It was about control. And in the ashes of everything they once held dear, they would carve out a new story. One where no one was innocent. One where every smile hit a blade. One where even a baby couldn't stop what came next. Anna had seen a lot in her lifetime, betrayals that shattered alliances, secrets that ignited wars. Lies wrapped in the clean language of intelligence work, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The moment the words left the room, her breath caught midair as though someone had slammed a wall of ice into her chest. Emma was pregnant. That alone was difficult enough to process. But it wasn't just a mistake or a youthful indiscretion. It was Vaughn's child. The same Vaughn she had suspected, the same Vaughn she never trusted. In that moment, the world that Anna thought she had under control tilted violently, and something inside her, instinct, maternal fury, the seasoned suspicion of a spy, awakened with an edge sharper than any WSB blade. This wasn't just personal. This was a violation. It was an infiltration into the most sacred part of her life, her daughter's future. But it got worse. Because as she began unraveling the threads behind Vaughn's sudden appearance in Emma's life, a new truth emerged, one far more devastating than the rest. Jason, her once comrade, once confidant, once shadowed friend in the field, had been holding something back. For years. For decades, even. And now, with a few lines of text across an encrypted screen, the silence was broken. Vaughn was Jason's son. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Biologically. The file was clean, no redactions, no hesitation. Jason had known. Vaughn had known. Anna had not. And now the man her daughter had given herself to, the man who had woven his way into Emma's heart under false pretenses, was not just some reckless agent or covert operative. He was the son of one of the most enigmatic and dangerous men Anna had ever worked beside. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was legacy. It was bloodline. And in that moment, something else became clear to Anna. This wasn't an accident. Vaughn being placed in Emma's orbit, Vaughn becoming the gravitational pull in her life. Vaughn manipulating her emotions, it had all been part of something larger, something designed, calculated, and kept hidden until the moment it would hurt the most. Her hands trembled not from fear but from rage. The WSB had played her. Jason had played her. And Vaughn, whether he knew the full extent of his manipulation or not, had become the trigger in a gun pointed straight at Emma's soul. Emma, meanwhile, had no idea. She only knew that her mother had gone silent, colder than usual. And that her eyes now carried something unreadable. She tried to reach her, to confess what she was going through, to share the emotional mess that came with this unexpected pregnancy. But Anna deflected, as if a steel curtain had dropped between them. Emma felt it deeply. She didn't know about the file, about Vaughn's bloodline, about the web tightening around her. All she knew was that her mother was slipping away. Vaughn, however, felt the shift. He had seen it in Anna's expression during the last exchange. The narrowed eyes, the sudden halt in speech. The unspoken knowing. And now, the silence. WSB hadn't contacted him in days. His coded reports went unacknowledged. He wasn't being watched anymore. He was being measured, for damage. For threat level, for removal. And he knew Anna was behind it. Jason, for all his stoic control, was suddenly back in the picture. Vaughn had never asked for his father's help before. He had always existed in the shadow of that man, always trained to be more than a name. But now, Jason was calling in favors, whispering truths that Vaughn never wanted to confront. It had to happen this way, he said coldly. You had to get close enough to make them reveal themselves. But Vaughn no longer cared about the mission. He cared about Emma. About the child. About the fact that no one had told him his entire life was an illusion. That he was born to play a role in a drama written before he could speak. That his actions had already been predicted by a man he barely knew but could never escape. Jason's presence was like a shadow looming over every move Vaughn made. It wasn't guidance. It was control. And Vaughn was beginning to resent it. Deeply. But Anna? She was combusting inside. The betrayal wasn't only about Emma anymore. It was about the WSB using her family, her daughter, her legacy. As pawns in a game so buried in black ops that even she hadn't seen it coming. She paced for hours, cross-referencing old missions, looking for signs, wondering when this plan had started. How far back it had been drawn. Was Vaughn embedded from birth? Had Jason volunteered his own son as a pawn? Had her instincts about Vaughn been correct all along? Or had she failed to see that he was just another victim in a system that devoured everyone it touched? Emma, oblivious to the bloodline battle happening above her, continued to drift further into isolation. The media storm hadn't subsided. The whispers followed her everywhere. She kept her phone off now. She had changed her route to campus. She began looking over her shoulder in public places. Pregnancy was supposed to be something sacred. But for Emma, it had become a sentence, a spotlight, a target. And she had no one left to turn to. Vaughn was half present, like a ghost trapped between duty and emotion. Her mother had disappeared behind a wall of disappointment. Gio was cold and distant, practically unreachable. Josslyn was terrifying. Emma didn't even recognize her anymore. The girl she once studied with, laughed with, trusted with secrets had become something else entirely. Dark. Calculating. Ruthless. Emma knew Joss had leaked the audio. She had no proof, but the timing, the precision, the cruelty, it all bore her mark. And now she couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Something final. What Emma didn't know was that Josslyn had uncovered the same truth Anna had. She knew Vaughn's last name now. She knew his paternity. And she was preparing to use it. Not for justice. Not for closure. But for destruction. Because Josslyn didn't care who Vaughn's father was. What she cared about was that everything, her trust, her plans, her heart, had been crushed. And now she was going to crush him back. Anna had a choice to make. She could expose everything, Vaughn's identity, the pregnancy, Jason's involvement, or she could stay silent and contain the fallout. But containment was no longer an option. Vaughn's past was already bleeding into the present. His genes, his legacy, his choices, they were no longer private. They were now tangled with Emma's future. And that future was unraveling faster than anyone could stop. What haunted Anna most wasn't the mistake. It was the possibility that none of this had been a mistake at all. That Jason had wanted this child to exist. That Vaughn had been born not just to serve, but to procreate, to plant a new generation of operatives. That her daughter had become part of a long, invisible war she never agreed to fight. And now, as she stared out over the silent skyline of Port Charles, her hands clenched tight, her jaw locked. She whispered only one name into the darkness, Vaughn. And in that whisper was a mother's grief, a spy's fury, and a woman's quiet vow that whatever came next, she would not let her daughter be devoured by shadows crafted by men she once trusted.